Yeah, so there are handouts, so if any of you haven't gotten the handouts, feel free to get one in case you wanted a copy of the slides. But I'm really glad to be here today, and thank you to Terry for organizing the session. She's been amazing. And I'm really happy to be able to give you a report to kind of talk about some of the findings that we saw based on the budget cut surveys that we did last semester. So we were really amazed at the participation that we got from faculty and staff. I think in total we received participation from about 1,800 individuals. So I think that clearly indicates that it's a topic that resonates for a lot of people. It's a topic that was really important for people. And I think based on the comments that we got personally, there were a lot of people that really felt just glad to have an opportunity to just talk about some of their feelings and thoughts and perspectives on the events that have unfolded over the past number of years. So. So with that, I will get started. I also need to thank the NSF Advanced Program at WSU for providing the grant funding that supported this research. So without them, it would have been very difficult to carry out a project of this size and scope. So I do want to thank them for that. I do have to, though, indicate that all the material that I'm presenting today it does not reflect the opinions or views of NSF, or for that matter, WSU administration. So I'm here just as a faculty member. This research was part of my own research agenda. I'm not the voice of the administration in any way. So in terms of what I'm hoping that we'll be able to cover today, give you a little bit of background and context for the backdrop for the study. Why did the survey exist? What were the origins? Provide a summary of the findings. Now, if you've looked at the feedback report itself, it's really big. So there's no way that I'm going to be able to go over all of that material. So what I've done is kind of extracted out what I thought were some of the more important salient points that I think were important to cover. I also want to make sure to spend some time to talk about some of the new analyses and findings that we've conducted since we released that feedback report. So that feedback report was released last May, and since then my graduate students and I have been extremely busy delving into the data even further. So I want to present some of those analyses as well. As we go through, we'll talk about perhaps some implications for WSU. In terms of questions, they are videotaping the session, so you're free to ask questions throughout, but they will be recorded for posterity. So if you prefer not to have that happen, you can ask questions at the very end. They're going to stop taping at the end of the slides. So, and I would ask that any questions that might be more discussion type questions that are in depth, maybe hold those till the end also, because we do have a lot of material to cover. So obviously we're all familiar with the economic backdrop for the context of why it is that we're in the state that we're in right now. Even though the Great Recession ended officially in 2009, the fact is that the economy has remained sluggish ever since then. Unemployment has remained high, and we continue to face budget shortfalls. So that's not occurring just in Washington State, but in many states around the nation. And as a result, of course, the state has to balance their budget. So they have more expenses and less revenue, and so something needs to be cut. And as you all know, probably, higher education, unfortunately, represents one of the largest discretionary chunks of spending within the state budget. And so, unfortunately, that tends to be one of the first areas where they turn to when they need to make cuts of this size and magnitude. So, obviously, WSU has not gone unscathed in that process. And this is just extracted from the budget website at WSU. So obviously, I'm sure you've all seen a lot of this information before in terms of the number of degrees and programs that have been phased out, consolidated, academic units that have been eliminated, consolidated, and so on. So obviously, you can't have cuts of this magnitude and not have them be felt in all corners of the university. So these are not cuts that have just been felt on the margins, but rather affecting most all faculty, staff, and students within the university. So in terms of why me? Why am I the one that's standing up here today? So I'm just a faculty member like many of you, but it just so happens that the research that I do in my role in the psychology department actually is on effects of economic stress, and I've been doing research in this area since the mid-1990s, specifically looking at the effects of employee job insecurity, layoffs, downsizing, restructuring, reorganizations, and how those organizational phenomenon influence the attitudes, behaviors, health, and well-being of employees. So when I saw the call for the social science small grant proposals from the advanced program, I thought this was a really neat way to merge the interests of the advanced program and their goal to enable WSU to be a research institution that promotes career-long excellence for faculty, and to merge that with my own research interests. And of course, faculty aren't the only ones who have been affected by these changes. So, so the project quickly expanded to also include staff and AP. And I'll tell you, I also got emails from students who are like, "Where's my survey?" They wanted to be surveyed too, but we haven't gotten there yet. But the basic research questions that we're going to talk about today are really, how have those budget cuts affected faculty in terms of job satisfaction, turnover intentions, performance outcomes in terms of teaching, research, and service. And then for the AP employees and staff, classified staff, what have been the attitudinal, behavioral, and health-related that's really, it's a little bit disconcerting. Okay. So in terms of the methodology and the samples, all faculty, staff, and AP employees were invited to participate in the study. There were 3 separate surveys. There was one survey that went out to chairs, deans, and directors. And that one basically tried to get an estimate of what were the kinds of cuts, the extent of the cuts that the various units had experienced, as well as getting data from the chairs to get their perspective on how faculty in the department had been affected. So how did it affect morale? How did it affect their ability to engage in their research and get tenured and promoted and so on. We also had a separate survey just for faculty because that focused a lot on teaching and research and service. So we got data there from 647 tenure and non-tenure track faculty. And then we had another survey that was dedicated to AP and staff. Now there's a lot of overlap between these surveys, but again, the AP staff survey also included some psychological health and well-being outcomes that weren't included in the faculty survey. We also had data from an earlier survey that my research lab had conducted within the WSU system from back in 2001, so 10 years ago, before all the budget craziness, or at least the most recent version of them. But so we did have data from 700 employees back then, and so we thought that actually, and a lot of the types of measures that we included on that survey were very similar ones, and so we were able to actually look at how things have changed within WSU among faculty, among staff over that 10-year time frame. And again, you can't necessarily attribute those changes solely to the budget cuts. There have been a lot of things that have happened in WSU since then, but they are, I think, illustrative, and they do comport with a lot of the other findings that we see. So in terms of, so I'm basically going to go through each of the different 3 surveys and go over some of those results. In terms of the chairs survey findings, what we found was an overwhelming concern among the chairs. I think 97% of them indicated that the budget cuts have negatively affected the morale of faculty. And I think when we look at the faculty data, that it corresponds with that. When we look at the extent to which they were worried that faculty were looking to seek out positions at other universities, 85% of them said that they were worried that faculty were in fact looking at positions elsewhere. And in fact, 58% of chairs reported at least one voluntary faculty departure within the past 3 years. Some of them, obviously, there were no faculty departures, so the range did go from 0, but there was at least one case where a department said that 6 of their faculty members had left within the past 3 years. And again, there's lots of reasons for voluntary faculty turnover, not necessarily all things that can be attributed to the budget cuts, but this is voluntary, not something from having been denied tenure and so on. And when we look at, again, the faculty data, and I'll get to that in a minute, these comport with the faculty data and suggest that the chairs have a reason to be worried because the turnover intentions data that we got from the faculty are extremely high, higher than what they were in 2001 and much higher relative to a number of comparison organizations that we were able to compare our data to. 83% of chairs were concerned that faculty don't have adequate resources to conduct their research. So you can see that was a very negatively skewed data set there with the majority of the people thinking that was an issue. 63% indicated that they thought that the budget situation specifically makes it more difficult to attract highly qualified candidates to WSU. And interestingly, a majority of them, not as much consensus on this one, but still 53% said that they felt that the budget cuts had adversely affected the ability of faculty to be tenured or promoted. Now, I don't have access to actual promotion and tenure rates among faculty, and to look at that historically to see whether, in fact, those rates have actually declined. I assume that that data is available at the university somewhere, but it would be interesting to look at, historically, do we actually see that, that during times of budget crises where you do have fewer resources, less ability to travel to conferences, to present your research, doing things that, become part of that ultimate tenure package, is there a relationship there? But it's clearly something that at least a majority of the chairs are worried about. Turning to the faculty survey, as I said, extremely high levels of turnover and tension. So I had mentioned, I've spent my whole career doing research in organizations that are undergoing a lot of the same things that WSU is undergoing. So I've got comparison data from 42 different companies, from employees in those different organizations. Now, they're not all higher education institutions, although I think about 3 or 4 of them are. So they come from all different industries, all different sectors, and so on. But they all have the commonality that their employees are undergoing these same kinds of stressors. And when we looked at the turnover intentions, again, using the same measure that had been used in all those different organizations, the turnover intentions for WSU faculty fell at the 95th percentile. So I think there was like one company where they had higher levels of turnover intentions. Not only that, but if you look at just within WSU, how have things changed over time? Well, since a decade ago, WSU faculty fell at the 65th percentile. So they were higher than the median even back then. But again, I think that's kind of the nature of academia. We tend to jump around from place to place sometimes. But I think that jump from the 65th percentile to the 95th percentile, again, is telling. If we look at some of the other changes that have happened since 2001, faculty job security and pay satisfaction have declined, and I think those things make sense in light of some of the changes. We've seen entire departments eliminated. We've seen programs disappear, and I think that oftentimes faculty think, well, I'm tenured, or I've got the ultimate job security. Well, we don't actually, and so I think it makes sense that we've seen this decline. Pay satisfaction makes sense that would decline, obviously, when you don't have pay raises for many years in a row. That's going to have an impact. But I thought it was really interesting that there were other things that remained high or even actually improved. So satisfaction with coworkers. So what I think about my departmental colleagues, that actually went up. Satisfaction with your promotion opportunities went up. Satisfaction with your department chair remained high and didn't change over that time. So I do think that this kind of mix of results tells me anyways that it's not just that we're getting grumpier over time, right? If we were just getting grumpier, like everything would have gone down. But we're actually seeing very specific things go down, other things stay the same, and other things improve. So I think that's an interesting set of findings. So to look at, to kind of get a little bit more data about, okay, obviously things have changed over time, but how much of it can really be attributed to the exposure to the budget cuts? We had 2 different ways of looking at that. One way was to ask them just what were the different kinds of changes that have occurred on their jobs since before the recession, so prior to 2008. So we said, we asked them, have you been asked to raise your course caps, fewer opportunities to teach during the summer, to teach DDP or online courses, fewer resources to teach effectively or to conduct your research, less opportunity to network professionally. So those are all things that, again, we're not asking them, did you lose these things because of the budget cuts? They may or may not know whether they were linked to that, but just has there been a loss of opportunity and a loss of resources since prior to the recession? A second set of questions actually directly asked them for their perception about how much have the budget cuts affected their research and teaching and scholarly productivity. So those are the questions you see there. So by looking at responses to both of those sets and then seeing how those correlate with the outcomes, we can kind of triangulate on where there's consistency across those different measures. That might lend a little bit more support that, yeah, there is something going on here in relation to the budget cuts themselves. So in terms of the different exposures, so again, these are just asking about the number of those things that they had, in terms of lost resources, lost opportunities. So we found that, you know, 23% of faculty said none of those things affected them whatsoever. So they didn't lose any resources, didn't you know, have any lost opportunities that we asked about. Again, that's the weakness of that measure. There might have been a whole host of other things that we didn't think to ask that we should have. So, and then again, another 23% said one of those things applied to them, or two of them, and then you can see it's positively skewed there and tapers off. So fortunately, there's very few faculty where all those things, you know, that they got hit with all those things. Interestingly, though, if you look at the extent of the perceived impact, overwhelmingly, faculty feel that, that their scholarly productivity and ability to do research and teach has been affected, at least to some degree, by the budget cuts. So 70% of them indicated above a 4 on that measure.